Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 13th of July 2025. We're going to go straight to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them linked in the description to the video below. And we have an uptick, and quite a big uptick in personnel lost, even though we have tanks at 3, troop-carrying FVs at 3, vehicles and fuel tanks at 101, which is all right. MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems 1, anti-aircraft warfare system 1. That could well be a book that we've just seen on a video getting destroyed. But 1,240 personnel lost is definitely an uptick. So something's going on there, maybe, or it just could be anomalous strikes on troop accumulations or something like that. 49 artillery systems taken out, so that's back up to a decent number there, over double the daily average. Okay, so some fairly useful numbers for the Ukrainians there. Let's go and look at, although this is a day in arrears, these are numbers now for 2 days ago. These are Andriy Perpetua's loss lists coming out again, and you can see that Ukrainians losing more than the Russians again, but the large proportion of that comms equipment pieces here. So that's worth taking into account. Now, someone said to me, don't ignore comms equipment. You know, it's important stuff. Yes, it is. But I'm not comparing a Starlink to a tank. Like Jiggers Paw as a charity can order you a Starlink and get that in. That's what, $300. What Jiggers Paw can't do is order you a T-64 or a Challenger 2. Right. So when we're looking at equipment loss, comms equipment is generally quite easily. I mean, it is super important, and it is annoying that they're losing this stuff, but generally they should be able to replace that far more easily. This is in here more for other people who concentrate on comms equipment. I'm less focused on comms equipment and more on this other stuff, so that's why I kind of ignore it. It is important, of course, but cheaper and more easily replaceable. Now, 4 Ukrainian boats here to have been sunk by night vision drones. I presume that is in the Dnipro River Delta by Kherson sort of area, the islands around there. We've got 3 artillery pieces damaged, 1 D-30 destroyed. I don't know what the SPG there that's damaged is, unrecognizable from the images, I presume. T-64 tank, single tank damage, single bits of kit here damaged, not an awful lot. As per usual though for the Ukrainians, a few MRAPs and infantry mobility vehicles, sort of Cossacks and Humvees and whatnot, and then you're down to quite a few civilian vehicles for the Ukrainians there. So, okay, nothing too crazy for the Ukrainians. Let's look at the Russian losses, see if the Ukrainians have had a better day than the Russians or not. We can see some surveillance comms equipment up at the top there, but not nearly as much. And then we're down to artillery and losing quite a few bits of artillery here that kind of tracks with what we see routinely on a daily basis in the general staff figures. We've got D-20s, D-30s, some really old howitzers, M46. I think that is the M46 an anti-tank gun, which means it's kind of direct fire rather than indirect fire. So if we put M46 gun, towed field gun, let's have a look. M46. No, it might not be. It might actually be, 27.5 kilometers. No, so it's indirect. That's not an anti-tank gun like the MT-12. So that is just a very old howitzer again. I mean, we're talking 40s, designed in the 40s and produced from 1951 onwards to the early 70s. They're losing one of them. It shows you that they are pulling this stuff out of deep reserve. And you got an MT-12 Rapira. That is an anti-tank gun, that one. So that will shoot, directly at a tank rather than indirect fire in a parabolic, sort of parabolic trajectory. Okay, we've got 5 tanks here, including a T-90M, which has been abandoned and then hit by an FPV drone. We have a track guard and shed thrown in for good measure. And then when you come down to the other bits of kit, you've got BMPs, MTLBs, all that sort of stuff. Quite a few ATVs, motorcycles, quads, and golf buggies, and then onto civilian equipment. So there or thereabouts. So the Russians have lost more combat assets than the Ukrainians, but that's mainly due to artillery losses there. So, Type 75 multiple launch rocket system. I presume that is a Korean one hit by a drone-dropped bomb. Okay, so on to other sources. Ukrainian soldiers took revenge on the Russian barbarians who killed a 1-year-old child in the Kherson region. So if you remember, I reported on this. The New York Post ran it as their front page story with the headline "Barbaric." The location where the crew of the Russian war criminals was located was established. A 5-story non-residential building in Holopristan. Operators of strike UAVs directed fire 5 FPV drones in 4 steps. In the future, no launches of enemy drones were observed from the established building. So it looks like they took out the very people who supposedly destroyed or killed that young boy. So that is a bit of justified revenge here from the Ukrainians. We hear that warriors from the 47th Magura Mechanized Brigade evacuated a wounded soldier and a fallen defender from the positions. The mission took 3 days of planning and very careful execution by experienced pilots. If it had been done in the traditional way, soldiers' lives would have almost certainly been lost, but removing these people from the contact zone using UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles, they are becoming more and more prevalent and used to get people out of very difficult situations. Here they say, let's something about we transported concertina wire, OZM mines, and inconspicuous wire obstacles in order to create a second line of defense and hold back the enemy. So I presume this is a case of these drones being used for multiple things. Loaded up drone with our brothers in arms. Here the cargo has been unloaded, so you take supplies in to the troops that are still there that can't really get supplied by regular trucks and whatnot, and then put the wounded and the dead guy on the UGV, and then that gets back to the Ukrainians safely. So that, I mean, that's one person getting taken out of the contact out of the frontline area, and that takes 3 days of organization. Just absolutely incredible. Really tough for both sides in that area where drones are just so prevalent. And I guess, would it be luck of the draw that drones didn't manage to take them out? Now, officials have revealed that Russia used the Tornado multiple launch rocket system to hit the center of Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka. All these places, Konstantinivka, are getting absolutely shellacked. And they are sending multiple launch rockets. Well, these are the Tornado. I presume they're talking about the guided missile version of that, which is similar to the HIMARS, the Gimlers that the Ukrainians use. These guided multiple launch rockets have actually a longer range, if that's what's being talked about here. Have a longer range than the HIMARS, to be honest. 120 kilometers as opposed to 84 kilometers. I think. And so they can do that, just send in those Gimlers into the middle of Sloviansk. 34-year-old man died in a terrorist attack near the bus station. 3 others were wounded. Horrible stuff going on there. Okay, moving on. So bad news for the Ukrainians here. And I have wondered about this, talked about this on a number of videos with you guys. Here we have 2 Russian Garan. So it's a Russian Shahed variant. Strikes on a Ukrainian 36D6 mobile 3D radar. So this is a high value bit of kit that's been hit not by Iskander missiles, not by Lancets or similar, but by effectively kind of Shahed drones being used to attack pieces of kit. And I've worried about this previously because if I was a Russian, I would be doing this much more often. And it's mobile power generator, both of which were completely destroyed. This is in the Chernihiv region. Interesting use of Shaheds, but definitely effective. Both radar and the generator were completely destroyed as a result of the strike. So yeah, big bang going on there. This is all being spotted by a Zala drone. And this is the importance of these drones, right? That probably wouldn't happen if you didn't have a drone sitting above spotting this, right? So it taking out these relatively cheap reconnaissance drones with relatively expensive missiles is actually a good return on investment, because that spotter drone, that reconnaissance drone, has done its job of acquiring a target worth, millions. And that has now been lost to the Ukrainians have lost that. The Russians have taken that out. Really problematic there. But interesting use of Shahed type drones. And then another worry for the Ukrainians here. Ukrainian Serhiy Flash says that the Russian FPV attacks are reaching 40 kilometers from the front line, with up to 50 strikes a day on some deep roads. This overlaps civilian areas, and he advises expanding traffic warning lights and issuing warnings on FM radio of strike location details. So here, that's a reference to the first Ukrainian traffic light that signals the threat level of FPVs has appeared on a southern frontline road. Such lights combined with safety zones made of nets will save lives. So this means the sky is clear in that image there. Really, and that's like a mobile traffic light system. But yeah, the Russians are adapting. The Russians are having success. You can see the huge huge fiber optic spools there, those containers on the bottom, with the RPG on the top there. Definitely a worry. Right, it's 99% likely that Russia just eliminated one of Ukraine's most experienced covert operators. Colonel Voronich ran the unit that killed Motorola and orchestrated critical parts of the Kursk incursion. So if you remember the other day, with a silencer, someone shot a Ukrainian colonel in Kyiv and then got into an SUV and did a runner. This might well have been, a really successful Russian hit on a high-level Ukrainian. This wasn't random violence, professional execution in broad daylight, complete with silenced pistol and a planned escape route, said the Euromaidan press. The killer remains unidentified. Voronich's Alpha unit received CIA technical support and spent decades building Ukraine's most sensitive capabilities against Russia. That expertise is now gone. The successful hit in Kyiv's center raises uncomfortable questions. How did assassins penetrate the capital's defenses to reach such a high-value target? So really, although someone else saying, look, relax, you will have highly trained deputies that can continue the program, which I would agree with, but it is a problem. This is definitely a problem that you have a high-ranking, very experienced individual being taken out in the middle of Kyiv. So Tim White then says this morning, breaking news as Ukraine has announced it has killed the assassins of the intel officer gunned down in broad daylight in Kyiv a few days ago. Intel boss Vasyl Malyuk says a special Russian FSB combat group murdered Colonel Ivan Voronich. And today's operation, Malyuk said, as a result of active counterintelligence measures, the enemy's lair was discovered during the detention. They began to resist. There was a firefight. The perpetrators were liquidated. Although no proof is provided, I believe 2 people were killed in that, possibly. But anyway, possibly more details will emerge over the day. So moving on, partisan movement Atesh. They report that partisans torched the Akhmat vehicle in occupied Mariupol overnight. Operation was carried out while the Russians were inside a nearby building. So good news there that they are still operating in places like Mariupol. What else? We have, so I thought I'd just show you this. This isn't from yesterday, but it's pretty indicative. So Tim White says, this is from Dnipropetrovsk region. Here you can see a chap walking out in front of a combine harvester. And the reason he's walking out in front of the combine harvester is to look for drone debris that would ruin the combine harvester. I mean, this is the reality of farming in Ukraine now. So, yeah, and the previous video, after rocket and drone attacks, a man goes out in front of the harvester to search for debris which would wreck farming equipment. Meanwhile, in Kherson, the dangers are evident there. Some wildfires caused by rocket attacks. I don't think that qualifies as being a wildfire. Now, I showed you a video very similar to this, where they were frantically trying to, I think, both harvest and also create breaks. So if you can cut the wheat down just before the fire gets there, you create a fire break. And that saves maybe the rest of the crop. Here you can see that digger just go and actually scoop up the fire. It's just really, that's really effective there. So that's one way of dealing with it, but it's going to be high risk, isn't it? Driving a digger through flames. But yeah, this is the sort of thing that these guys have to deal with on a regular basis, I guess, in Ukraine. Right, okay. I just thought I'd show you that. Moving on to the strikes. And last night, it was a much quieter night. However, quite a few did get through. We often see this, that actually recently we've had over 700 drones, and that was a sort of, what was it, 98% interception rate the other night, 600 and whatever, it was a 96, 97% interception rate. Really doing very well to intercept these drones if they are predominantly sent across Ukraine at places like Lviv or Kiev, right? So you got a lot of time to shoot them down. But when they are sent against Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and whatnot, there's not a lot you can do about them, and they just slam into these cities that are very close to, or towns that are very close to the front line. So last night only 60 was sent, but 20 got through, so that's a third. So you're moving down from like the late 90s in terms of percentage interception rates for 700 drones down to only 60 drones, but then you're at what, 66% interception rate, 67% interception rate. So 20 was shot down by air defense, 20 suppressed by electronic warfare, and 20 got through. So we'll look at where they hit in a while. Russia's massive drone assaults aren't just destruction anymore. The Institute for the Study of War says the real goal is to psychologically exhaust Ukraine and erode Western support. So we are seeing, I think, lots of drones be used to target civilians. So it is, I often question whether they're going for military targets and then just get sent, off their trajectory by electronic warfare, or whether interceptions, can damage the wing and they fly off and hit a residential building. I think that does happen an awful lot, but also they are aiming at civilians too. Now, here is an infographic to suggest that they've really ramped up these attacks. Although in between, you might see that some days there are fewer than over in this section. But actually, when you start adding all these on, I mean, there are some huge strikes here that just absolutely dwarf what was previously achieved by the Russians. Trump's phone call with Putin, and then you get a massive attack day after. Second, Ukraine-Russia bilateral talks in Istanbul took place the day after a massive strike. And first, Ukraine-Russia bilateral talks in Istanbul happen around there. And really, that's where you're seeing them ramp up. So, I think there's a lot of symbolism to these attacks, but also a lot of attempted terrorism from the Russians. Now, talking about the missile components to these attacks, Russia's stockpile of ballistic missiles is shrinking. So this is good news for the Ukrainians. Because especially you hear so often that, oh my goodness, the Russians are building this many drones each day and this many missiles, and they're stockpiling, and then you hear this, and so sometimes there's a bit of confusion over exactly what the Russians are producing. I mean, I think they've certainly ramped up their production of Shahed drones, and I'm pretty sure they have ramped up as much as possible their missile production, but they're also using quite a few Iskanders at the moment, and possibly maybe getting some from North Korea, these KN-23. So Russia's stockpile of ballistic missiles is shrinking. Ukraine's military intelligence says only around 300 Iskander-M and KN-23 missiles remain. Meanwhile, over 60 tactical missile launchers have been deployed near the border. And these should be your target. Well, not number one, because I keep talking about places like Yelabuga and drone manufacturing facilities being the major target. But I also think these launches, now there were some taken out, was it Bryansk recently, Iskander launchers were taken out there. I don't know how many they got. They say that 60 tactical launchers are deployed near the border. You can bet your bottom dollar Ukraine will be looking out for these. As of today, Russia has about 250 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, about 50 North Korean KN-23s. This means a significant reduction in the enemy's reserve, because in May, according to estimates, the Russian Federation had about 580 ballistic missiles in stock. So they essentially halved their stocks in a month and a half. So Ukrainian intelligence, Russia's advanced ballistic missile arsenal shrinks by nearly 50% since May. The drastic depletion includes hundreds of Iskander-M and North Korean supplied KN-23 missiles. Suspected drone damage was found this morning in Romania. That's not for the first time, but we haven't heard that for some time. So that is a thing. What else? Sloviansk. So Russian forces struck a hospital overnight in Sloviansk with a Shahed drone, a kindergarten, several apartment blocks, and private homes were also damaged in the attack. Completely typical activity from the Russians there. That would be war criminally illegal, I would suggest. I was virtually the only person last night, said Tim White, to write about drone strikes on Sloviansk in the free part of Donetsk. It's now known Russia hit the center again, striking a hospital, kindergarten, private houses. And here is the evidence to show that. Just really horrific stuff there. Yeah, that's what the Russians do. In an earlier thread, he was talking about, it was actually fairly quiet otherwise, although there were places like Dnipropetrovsk were hit over. Last night, school was destroyed in Mezhova, a village only 20 miles or so from Pokrovsk, where battles rage. Now, sometimes schools nearer the front are used to billet soldiers, so just be warned that even though that's a Ukrainian school being hit, it is fairly near the front and it could have been a troop accumulation point. An elderly woman has been killed today as Russia dropped aerial bombs in the Sinelniki area of Dnipropetrovsk. So again, horrific scenes of civilian infrastructure being damaged, shelled and attacked by the Russians. Now, unfortunately, another, and this is at least the seventh in the last sort of week or two, the seventh TCC has been hit. Actually, I don't know if that is that one. Yes, but here it is. So, first photos emerged from a drone attack on Samar in Dnipropetrovsk region, still restricted by martial law. The first pic allegedly shows writing on a drone wreckage, quote, for the military recruitment center from grateful people of Samar, but it's in Ukrainian, so I'm skeptical. They have done that before, and I think they've shown that in Russia, so that is a thing. So yeah, another TCC has been hit, which is a recruitment center. As I say, I think the seventh in recent times. So more information emerging as time goes on. Yeah, here it goes. So Russia hit a TCC building in Samar. There are dead and wounded, according to local media. So that's another huge shame there, as these recruitment centers are being purposefully targeted systematically at the moment. In Donetsk region, here you can see that terminal phase of that Shahed drone there. Shaheds begin to attack checkpoints. So not only have we seen a Shahed take out a radar or a Gran, a similar sorts of drone. You're used to seeing, plaguing cities like Kiev. Well, now they're taking out individual bits of kit like radars and here checkpoints, the sort of checkpoints I've been through, close to the front lines, where you're driving around and you have to go through these block points and you do a bit of chicaning, and they have these big concrete areas and then the sort of checkpoint huts and whatnot, and they check your papers and everything. Well, it's those that are now being targeted with Shahed drones. It's a real, I think, issue. These Shaheds are a freaking problem. And I just want to also, this is a bit doomy today, really, but I want to just warn you that over the last couple of weeks, where Lutsk and Lviv have been targeted, I've been mentioning that they will almost certainly have been hitting the military industrial complex. And when you have that many drones being sent, and even if the interception rate is sort of 97%, you are still going to get 20 to 30 drones through when you're sending 700 odd drones. And those 20 to 30 drones are hitting targets in Lutsk and in Lviv. And those targets, I think, have been largely military industrial complex targets. Yes, they're going to be hitting civilian infrastructure, either purposefully or being sent awry. But there will have been some serious damage that we won't know about. And in fact, here is an example of us actually knowing about it by looking at firms data. So it looks like Russians are systematically degrading Ukrainian aviation-related facilities. This is in response to a fire being detected at the Lviv State Aviation Repair Plant. The facility specializes in the repair and modernization of MiG-29 airframes. So this is in Lviv. Indeed, that fire was, it looks like it got bigger, if that's the same place. This is bad. A large fire is raging at the, Lutsk. Right, so that was Lviv. And I presume you got two fires going on there. then we are moving supposedly to Lutsk here, where the Lutsk repair plant the motor repair plant, is the only facility in Ukraine capable of overhauling MiG-29 engines, has been hit as well. So we have a MiG-29 repair plant there, and in Lviv, and a MiG engine overhaul plant. It looks like that's in serious trouble with the amount of fire going on there, according to the firm's data. So the last couple of weeks, you might just think, oh, right, okay, Ukraine's taken a bit of a hammering in terms of drones, but, not too bad. There weren't many casualties. Well, actually, I think the real intention from these strikes is still going to be military targets. And the military targets will be the military-industrial complex that is kind of growing in Ukraine, as they're getting investment from outside entities and nations and venture capitalists and other defense concerns. You're also getting foreign defense concerns coming up and setting up shop in Ukraine. And they are going to be making and fixing and designing stuff all over, particularly the West. That is what is going to have been targeted, will continue to be targeted. And the Russians are, going to town on that and will continue to. Now, here is an example. So I wonder, is this... so this is Chernivtsi, which is further to the south than Lviv, but still really over on the west. A western Ukrainian city where 2 people were killed in the early hours of Saturday morning. It's clear from a new video that this was another blatant war crime, cluster munitions sweeping through a highly populated area. Russian scum. So that's what Tim White said. If you look at this, you've got cluster munitions absolutely hammering down here. You can see a number of different explosions, and in fact I think there's a slightly different video here from the same sort of place. I know it's the same one, but it's slight. Actually, you can see it slightly better. The resolution is slightly better in this one. So you can hear that rattle of cluster munitions exploding, then something else blowing up. So I wonder whether they're setting cluster munitions down on a military-industrial concern to try and make sure they do the sorts of damage possibly that you see here. Rather than one strike, cluster munitions causing fires all over the shop, or that is just blatant war criminal activity against a civilian target. And then the question is, well, is it, even if it's a military target in a civilian environment, is it problematic? Is it a war crime to use cluster munitions there? So all of these questions, I don't know the definite answer. I know that you are justified in hitting military targets in a context of civilian environment, but then it's about proportionality and using the right weapons, etc. Why is no one talking about Russia using cluster munitions on Ukrainian cities, says Richard Woodruff. Go and check his my interview with him the other day. Really good to chat to him. It's on the live. In fact, no, I put it on the normal feed as well, so you can go and check it on both the live tab and the normal feed. Thanks, Benny, for doing that. 20 kilometers from the NATO border, and yet we still believe they aren't coming for the rest of Europe. Chernivtsi is a magical city of 250,000 plus people, and yet cluster munitions are ramming into that. Now, there's a claim last night that unknown drones struck an oil refinery in Kosovo in Russia. That's 2 nights in a row we've not really heard of any drones doing anything in Russia. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if they're stockpiling. There were claims that the 14th is when they're going to send 1,000 drones into Russia. That could be tonight, could be tomorrow night. I don't know. That's Russians claiming that. Now, there's a couple of quiet nights, though, really, from the Ukrainians. The claim here is that Kosovo went dark. As a result of the attack, many areas were left without electricity and explosions were heard even in cities west of the regional centre. I have heard this morning Tim White is reporting that actually that was due to storms and not drones, and that there's no sort of lasting damage to the refinery on show today. So I don't know. There are some claiming that drones struck in Kosovo, some claiming that actually that's a result of storms that are sweeping through Russia. Just one more thing on drones. Now, the Ukrainians are claiming that the Russians are... Sorry, The Russians are claiming Ukrainians are using a new drone. Looks a bit like a X-wing. This is what visited us today, says a Russian source. A Ukrainian semi-jet drone. The shape is not similar to a corn cob, but to a combat fighter aircraft, only smaller in size. It has a warhead. It flies at an altitude of several kilometers. For the entire time of the war, this is the first time such drones have been detected so deep in the rear. Okay, so that is a claim from the Russians. Context, though, could be this. A Russian source posted an image of a new Ukrainian long-range jet drone, which may be the long-range weapon that Germany helped fund. It looks like something you can produce over several hundred of each month. The kukuruznik, or corn cob, refers to a propeller plane. So this is potentially a new jet. They say semi-jet. Regarding the power plant on the drone, I don't think, says H.I. Sutton, we should focus too much on the semi-jet phrase. The word for turboprop in Russian is different. Seems more likely just a jet, but we'll see. The Germans have apparently been funding something, and then Christian Freuding, the German military man, yesterday said that you will see what we've been helping the Ukrainians with within a month, and it could be that it's already there. It's already being used. Now, some are hoping that this could be a kind of redesigned Taurus, that the Germans have helped the Ukrainians to develop their own cruise missile. And it could be that you might see that. Others are saying it's long-range drones like the existing Lyuti drones that they have been helping with and funding. Because we know the Ukrainians use an awful lot of the Lyuti drone, but it could be a new type of drone, as you're seeing there. I mean, who knows? But anyway, there are all sorts of rumours going about, and there appears to be now a picture of a new type of Ukrainian drone. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. So Ukrainian armed forces have achieved a tactical advance, according to the Institute for the Study of War, the American military think tank, in the Pokrovsk area in Donetsk region. So this is really good news, although it might be only on a very minor sort of scale. The AFU have advanced south of Udachny, so that's over here, Udachny. So that's really good news. Meanwhile, Russia continues its attacks in the direction of Rodinska, Volodymyrivka, Krasny Liman, Razin, and Myrna. But then, so these are a number of other places, but actually Visioner seems to think that the Ukrainians are pushing back in this pocket here, right to the south of Pokrovsk. I mean, the worry is that the Russians are moving to the north of Myrnohrad. You've got Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, if I just make that a little bit bigger, over here. And the Russians are doing a good job of coming over to the north after they broke across this T0504 highway that comes down there. You got that junction there. They broke across there. The motorbike attack up here. You got Turetska over here, by the way. And they're moving in this direction to try and encircle Pokrovsk. So the Ukrainians, either they sit there and wait for it, or they try and mount a counter. And it looks like they're trying to mount a counter, but I guess we'll hear more over the coming days. Big news: Ukrainian forces made some tactical gains in the Pokrovsk sector of Donetsk, according to the ISW. So we'll have a look at that. Now, there is news that the Ukrainians have cut back on big tank brigades to create a deadlier kind of brigade. So Ukraine's tank brigades are disappearing. The army is getting new heavy mechanized brigades that are better for infantry first fighting. The famed 1st Tank Brigade is the third of Ukraine's 5 tank brigades to undergo the transformation. After its reorganization, the brigade now has just 2 ostensibly 31 tank battalions instead of 3, but has added a 2nd mechanized battalion, which on paper has 31 infantry fighting vehicles. So maybe replacing tanks with infantry fighting vehicles, which I think we've seen over the course of the war, would be more effective, such as a Bradley. But, how many Bradleys do they have? Are they going to get any more? Big, cumbersome, easy to spot tanks are just too vulnerable in a tiny first-person view drones to them that are everywhere all the time, all along the front line. Quote, the reduced time between detection and engagement, driven by real-time drone surveillance and a high velocity of FPV drone attacks, has created a hostile environment for traditional armoured platforms on the battlefield. Ukrainian analyst group Front Intelligence Insight explained. So that's actually Tatarigami. Then it goes on to talk about the success of this tank brigade, particularly around Chernihiv at the beginning of the war, and how with their T-64s, I think, with the quick auto loading and only 3 people in a tank were actually, they weren't destroyed by the initial attacks by the Russians who were hiding out in the forest and then caused havoc. But that was at a time before huge FPV drone coverage changed warfare. But now, as it says, we're just going to join the article at the end. It's a new era of the cautious tank, says David Kirichenko, an analyst with the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. This is back in September. Tanks are even more cautious now than they were last autumn. Overall, there is less armor being deployed on the front, especially compared to 2023, Kirichenko said. So we are still in the era of the cautious tank. Or we could say that it's got even more cautious now. The Ukrainian army responded to the changing environment. The 17th Tank Brigade reorganized in October or November, reducing its tank inventory to become the first of the Ukrainian army's new heavy mechanized brigades. The 5th Tank Brigade underwent the reorganization in December, and the Ukrainian ground forces are also adopting a new corps structure that places similar brigades fighting in the same sectors under a single command. It's possible these corps, there should be 13 of them, will each have just one separate tank battalion. The forces for these battalions, the tanks and crews, could come from the tank brigades, some of which may be disbanded, Military Land reported. Meanwhile, the tank battalions in the mechanized, motorized and mountain brigades will be reduced in size. Today, the Ukrainian military should have 30 or so tank battalions with around 1,000 tanks. The possible reorganization could cut that structure in half. Fewer battalions and many more tanks in reserve to replace losses from drones. The tanks are assuming a secondary role as infantry, and the armoured trucks and tracked vehicles that speed them to and from their trenches take on the lead role on this new era of ever-present drones and cautious tanks. So if you go and look at the Russian activity, their tanks are used not as tanks predominantly. They're tracked garden sheds that are used to get as glorified APCs to get troops from A to B, and that's kind of what's underwriting this. Tanks are just too vulnerable with the way that this particular war, that's not to say they're obsolete, but when you've got a massively contested airspace, both from aviation but really more from drones, tanks become vulnerable. And, what you would use tanks for is not so important when you're just, trying to take a tree line here and a dugout there and so on and so forth. So tanks are taking a bit of a backseat, and that could be why you've seen it almost certainly is why you've seen that reorganization from the Ukrainian point of view. Now, I want to just highlight the problem of the North Koreans. So Kim Jong-un has pledged unconditional support for Russia's war against Ukraine. Kim said his country stands, quote, ready to unconditionally support and encourage all the measures taken by the Russian leadership as regards the tackling of the root cause of the Ukrainian crisis, i.e. those plucky Ukrainians. Now, No Report says South Korean military intelligence reports that North Korea has supplied Russia with over 12 million rounds of 152mm shells to support its war against Ukraine. Since October, Pyongyang has also sent around 13,000 troops, including 5,000 construction workers and 1,000 sappers, to Kursk. Actually, I think that's on top of the 13,000 personally. Well, originally we had 11,000 being sent, then there were claims that they sent some more, and there were 14,000, and then the 6,000 on top of that, and then recently there's 25 to 30,000 being rumoured to go, and then there are 25,000 North Koreans going to Yelabuga to help construct drones there, and to take that knowledge back to North Korea and build drones on behalf of Russia. So North Korea are a huge problem for Ukraine. We had Budanov come out the other day, the intelligence chief, and say that 40% of Russian ammunition is coming from North Korea. We talked already about KN-23 ballistic missiles from North Korea. They've got multiple launch rockets systems. They've got self-propelled guns, but just the sheer volume of artillery ammunition that's come from there. 28,000 containers is what has supposedly gone from North Korea to Russia, all stacked full of weapons. Just incredible. Absolutely incredible. So do not dismiss North Korea. North Korea, I think, are to some degrees a game changer for Russia. I think if it wasn't for North Korea, Russia would be screwed. I think North Korea changed the game for Russia. And what do I mean by changing the game? Just like if North Korea didn't exist, Russia would be in an absolute F-ton of trouble now. Honestly, they would. Think where Russia would be without 28,000 containers of weapons and ammunition from the North Koreans and those troops that helped kick back the Ukrainians out of Kursk. Honestly, North Korea, the history books I'm sure will show that North Korea played a really vital part in Russia's ability to maintain its war effort for the last 8 months or so. Huge. And Kim Jong-un is saying, we're unconditionally going to continue to do this. Zelensky has signalled a major cabinet reshuffle. He's called for defence reforms. So Zelensky said Ukraine, quote, requires more positive momentum in relations with the United States, alongside new steps in merging the nation's defence sector. The announcement comes amid broader speculation of significant personnel changes within Ukraine's government. So we know that Makarova, the Ukrainian ambassador to the US, has gone, right? Who's she going to be replaced with? Well, we are hearing that Zelensky is reportedly considering Defense Minister Rustem Umerov as Ukraine's next ambassador to the US. According to Suspilna, Umerov is currently seen as a sole contender for the key post in Washington. If appointed, his successor will likely come from within the current government. That could also be because I think he's got family in the US as well, so it all kind of makes sense. Now, then you see a handshake that Zelensky put on his own socials. As Tim White says, a farewell handshake. It looks ever certain that Ukraine's defense minister is to be made US ambassador. Zelensky posted this photo yesterday evening, after their meeting today. Rustem Umerov certainly won't object. His family lives in the US. Now, the big question is who will replace him as defense minister, because that is such an important role. So we'll have to see. Who was it before? Was it Reznikov? And then Umerov. And I think they both did have done a pretty good job in incredibly challenging circumstances. That's such an important role. Now, there's all sorts of chatter about what's going to take place on Monday when Trump makes these big calls. Loads of people, CBS News, have been talking about possibilities. US officials told CBS News that Trump has $3.85 billion in leftover Biden-era presidential drawdown authority sitting at its fingertips, which could be used to send American military equipment to Ukraine. We hear that he's also reportedly considering seizing $5 billion in frozen Russian assets abroad and redirecting the funds to Ukraine. That's from CB News as well, and as well as all of the PDA available. The Telegraph, however, reports that he might demand Ukraine give up territory. So he could do a bit of both sides there. I hope that's not the case. I hope that he doesn't say, look, we're going to do all this amazing stuff. You need to give up, Donbass, Crimea. That would be just a kick in the teeth. It would be lovely if Trump just did a bit of an about face on Monday and just said, yay, here's all the PDA, knock yourself out. Here's some Patriots. We're going to sell a bunch of Patriots to these guys. They're going to give them to you. Then we're going to do PDA. Then we get frozen Russian assets. We give that to you. Woohoo, let's go crazy. That would be brilliant. But, it's Trump, so who knows. Now, unfortunately, at the same time, I don't know what's going on here. Lots of people reporting on this. This is an article in the New York Times. So some people saying this is just deeply inappropriate. So the New York Times, Jimmy Russian here says, embedding a reporter with Kadyrov's Akhmat. So this is Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord, has the Akhmat Special Forces units operating a lot up in Kursk. So the New York Times embedded a reporter there with them, guilty of numerous brutal war crimes against Ukrainian soldiers and civilians alike, and even credibly accused of murdering multiple Russian soldiers from other units. Violates pretty much every principle of journalistic ethics. Let's go and embed ourselves in with a bunch of moral monsters. Hey, just see how it is. A landscape of death. What's left where Ukraine invaded Russia? So just the way that the title is phrased here by the New York Times, that's absolutely terrible. So, if anyone wants to give the New York Times a bit of a hard time over this article, please go for it. It is by photographs and reporting by Nana Heitman. She spent 6 days in frontline areas of Russia's Kursk region, escorted at times by members of the Akhmat Special Forces unit, evacuating the area. And that's completely ignoring this ridiculous framing, which effectively blames Ukraine for the war Russia started encroaching on Russian territory. It's entirely unsurprising the reporter responsible is based in Moscow. Yeah. Right, just finally, Russian economy is not going very well, says Defmon, referring to Evgen Istrobin's piece here. Russian defense industry does not pay its suppliers. So the third lawsuit in 2 months has been filed against the T-90M tank manufacturer. MMK increases demands on Ural Vagon Zavod to 105 million. They are not paying their suppliers. And these are people at the heart of the war project, the defense industry. Non-payment crisis in the Russian defense industry. The manufacturer of the Tu-160, so these are strategic bombers, and the Tu-95MS strategic bombers was demanded to pay almost 1 billion rubles. The MOD filed a lawsuit against Tupolev. More than 211 million rubles demanded from manufacturer of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russian Defense Ministry files 4 lawsuits against Krunichev State Research and Production Space Center. I don't know if this is just setting up the situation to nationalize all of these entities. Who knows? We also hear that Putin orders support for the manufacturing industry after the worst drop in business activities since the war. Putin, so this is the headline from Moscow Times. Putin orders support for manufacturing industry after a worst drop in business activity since war. The Kremlin posted this. The president approved a list of instructions following a meeting with members of the government held on May the 22nd, 2025. There are 4 items on the list, and 3 of them had due dates of the 15th of July, 2025. So maybe they're instructed to do this earlier, and they just now got around to publishing it. Item number 1 is the one we're interested in. It has a due date of 1st of August 2025. 1. The government of the Russian Federation, with the participation of the Bank of Russia, shall take additional measures to support the manufacturing industries, including with the aim of ensuring that by the end of 2025, the volume of industrial production in priority sectors of the manufacturing industry is at least at the level of 2024, paying attention to A, to further stimulate demand for industrial products, B, to stimulate investment activity, including providing the necessary amount of financing for state support mechanisms, primarily the cluster investment platform and industrial mortgages, and ensuring the prompt implementation of support mechanisms for priority projects in industry. So Prune 60 says, now how are they going to accomplish this task? I've discussed multiple times some of their many fundamental problems. Keeping all that in mind, how would Russia accomplish this task when they're already halfway through 2025? Worth also pointing out there have been several mysterious deaths recently, in these contexts. So it's all looking very, very dodgy for the Russian economy, where the Russian central government is looking at getting back towards central planning, and you've got they're putting lawsuits against defense manufacturers, non-payment of debts. You've got then getting involved in trying to stimulate the manufacturing industry centrally, and it's all looking like the sovereign wealth fund is going to be used, I guess, to just take over the economy. I don't know. It's all looking rather dodgy for the Russian economy. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pits.